We've just finished up week 5 of season 3, which was Fortified, Bolstering, Logout. There's actually entangling, but the affixes were pretty bad, especially in pug keys. In coordinated groups, especially the high key pushing groups, Fortified Bolstering isn't that bad. I would even call it a push week, so long as the tanks know what they're pulling around bolstering and the DPS know what targets they're funneling priority damage into, or at least which ones they're killing first. In pugs, however, that just isn't the case. And I didn't play much last week for that reason, because bolstering fortified is just, it's too punishing, it's too difficult, and it requires a lot of coordination, and in pugs that just doesn't really exist, and as a healer especially, there just isn't much I can do to make the affix better. So I took last week as an opportunity to play lower keys, to pretty much just spam 18s to try and get vault slots and some gear on as many of my lower item level healing ults as possible. And even in 18s, I found quite a few dungeons, quite a few trash packs that were pretty difficult. I had more wipes last week than I think in any other affix for the season so far. There are a lot of mobs in Everbloom, in Blackrock Hold, in Throne of the Tides, in Fall, in Rise, in pretty much every key that very quickly become one-shot turrets once they get 1 or 2 or 3 stacks of bolstering. So I don't have a whole lot to talk about what I've been doing this week because I just haven't been playing that much. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a similar story for what is now this week or week 6 because of the holidays and Christmas and all that kind of real life commitments. So in this video, I'll be covering briefly what I was doing, which was mostly just playing Resto Shaman after getting the 4-piece, and the class tuning that was announced, or the patch notes for December 19th. So last week I played mostly Resto Shaman. That's because I got lucky in my vault and got a nice 483 tier set helmet, which was one of the tier slots I needed, so I got my 4-piece on my Shaman. So I jumped into keys to see how the 25% healing bonus to Riptide would feel, and how Shaman was feeling with a little bit more gear. The conclusion I came to was effectively that I can't tell if I am really bad at the spec, or if the spec is quite limited. I think it's probably a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I say this because there were definite times where I felt like I was lacking buttons. And that comes down to, in my mind, multitasking, so to speak, in keys. That is, on most other healers I play, I have buttons I can use or combine together to do a couple of different things at once. If I need to top the group as quickly as possible after some AoE damage goes out, while also keeping an eye on, let's say, a single target that gets a debuff on them, or needs some priority healing, or maybe the tank is getting smashed, and all of those kind of things happening at the same time. On other healers, I always have buttons to lean on to accomplish that. Oftentimes that's an external, but it could also just be a quite powerful cooldown, something like TFT on Mistweaver, or any one of Divine Toll or Plea or Sack or Bop or Lay or whatever on Paladin. Same kind of thing on Preservation. If I needed to do a lot of group healing, I can always do that with the normal Preservation ways, and then I could always Echo Verdant Embrace someone if they needed a lot of spot healing, or I have an external for the tank. But on Resto Shaman, it felt like those options were a little lacking. Now, like I said, I'm not quite sure if this is because I am bad at the spec and I'm not pressing the right buttons at the right time, or if the buttons I am pressing are correct, but they're just not quite as powerful enough. I'm not quite sure exactly where Resto Shaman falls on that kind of spectrum, but I can say that in dungeons like Throne of the Tides, where let's say a drowning debuff was going out while the tank was also getting kind of clapped, I could really struggle on Resto Shaman. In higher keys, I think this could become less of an issue because tanks are almost fully self-sufficient at the highest levels, and in coordinated groups, they can route and plan around not having an external. But in pugs, it makes some routes, like the default routes, much more difficult. Things like going into Throne of Tides and pulling a whole hallway or half a hallway together, because in a lot of groups' eyes, those pulls can really just be a matter of kicking a couple of casts and everything dies. But as a healer, I'm trying to deal with bleed stacks on the tank or on other people who get fixated. I'm trying to heal the drowning debuff targets while also trying to contribute a little damage and heal the tank and all that kind of stuff. And not having an external, or What feels like very good single target healing made those situations quite difficult. Single target healing feels a little lacking. It could very well be a gearing issue. It could also be a bit of an expectation versus result bias too. My healing surge has like 60% or more than 60% critical strike chance, and I can get used to it critical striking and seeing a health bar like really move up. And then there are other times where I'll press it and they don't crit, and my healing feels like I've cast a spell and nothing's happened. Even in the 18s I was doing in places like Waycrest, I felt like I needed to have a healing surge for every tick of some debuffs like Etch. At similar gear levels on my Preservation Evoker, Mistweaver, Discipline Priest, those same debuffs are things that I can let tick 2 or 3 times and then instantly and reliably top that health bar. Whereas on my Resto Shaman, I didn't really feel like I had that option. I had to be on the debuffs instantly, and then I had to stand still and turret heal that person through an Etch, for example. I am hoping it's just a gear issue, or maybe it's a player issue, and hopefully I'll just get a bit better and a bit more comfortable with Resto Shaman, because the rest of the spec actually felt pretty good. AoE healing felt good, cooldowns felt pretty good, but also only cooldowns in AoE situations. Damage felt especially quite good. Having such a short cooldown kick was pretty fantastic. But again, I wish my single target healing was a little bit more powerful. If I'm going to Earth Shield someone as the debuff is getting cast on them, and then Riptide to make sure I have 2 stacks of tidal waves and then healing surge twice, that person shouldn't be dying to anything with that much healing, especially if I'm going to be using 4 globals and I'm going to stand still and spend quite a bit of mana doing it and not heal anybody else for that time. I should do a huge amount of healing on that target, but it doesn't really feel like that. I found myself in many situations where I would deal with a debuff the same way I did on my Mistweaver or on my Evoker and failed miserably on my Resto Shaman. Being able to deal with very spiky damage, debuffs in particular, with just an Echo Verdant Embrace, or a Power Word Shield Defensive Penance, or a Life Cocoon, or a TFT Enveloping, those are the kind of tools that I found myself really appreciating when I played my Shaman, because I didn't feel like I had those options. If something happens and someone's going to die with a debuff or something like that, in all those other instances I mentioned, I can move while doing a lot more healing on those other healers than I can on my Resto Shaman while I'm standing still turret healing someone. Apart from all of that, the only thing I really have to say about Resto Shaman is I wish Earth Shield was better. I don't mean necessarily more numerically powerful. I think it either needs more charges or a longer duration or a way to grant it charges. Like, I think the old legendary used to grant charges when you healing wave a target with Earth Shield on them. So without that, it feels like I'm pressing Earth Shield so often. Like, it's a 10-minute buff on someone, but I feel like I'm pressing it every 15 seconds. As far as the class tuning that hit at the start of this week, week 6, towards the end of week 5, Blizzard announced the upcoming class tuning for next reset, which was December 19th, the start of week 6. There isn't a whole lot here for healers, but what is here is kind of interesting. The Preservation Resonating Sphere change once again applies Echo to the first 5 allies rather than 3. I don't know what problem Blizzard has been trying to fix with this change. This was announced, I believe, prior to 10.2 and then reverted, or maybe it was 10.1.5. They announced that they were going to make this change the first time. There was quite a bit of backlash about it on the forums and content creators saying it was going to be a terrible change. So Blizzard backed down, and then they waited, I'm guessing, I think it was like a month or 2, to then implement this change again, to reduce the temporal anomaly echoes from 5 to 3. And then it's lasted a couple of weeks, and now it's going back again, back to 5. This is one of those changes that I think could seem okay if you were a developer and your only experience with preservation was in Raid. You could look at something like temporal anomaly applying echoes, tune it down from 5 to 3, and pat yourself on the back for a job well done with the patch that was supposed to curtail a lot of AoE throughput from healers with the 10.2 changes. But anyone who's played Preservation in Keys knows that temporal anomaly applying echoes to your whole party is a huge part of what makes preservation workable in keys. This is always either used to significantly buff your dream breath or to apply reversion to 5 targets to increase the amount of healing they take by 10% with the talent that everybody basically takes. It can also be used for things like applying Lifebind to your whole party before you Emerald Communion. It is an important and integral part of preservation healing in Mythic Plus. And it's interesting that Blizzard have even said that after watching the change play out, we're not happy with the resulting gameplay, particularly in dungeons. The only thing I really have to say here is like, it's a good change, but it is a little disheartening that Blizzard had to see it play out to realize that this is what the consequences would be. Mistweaver is getting a couple of nerfs, but in what I would say are quite good ways. Unison is nerfed, Enveloping Breath Healing is reduced by 10%, and Essence Font reduced by 8. These are good changes that slightly reduce Mistweaver throughput in Raid, but really doesn't touch them in keys at all, which is, I'm really happy to see this. After seeing how the World First Race played out and how Mistweavers have been performing in Raid, or Mythic Raid especially, I am relieved to see changes come through that aren't going to destroy the spec in keys, because Mistweaver right now, Mythic Plus, is the most meta it's ever been, and I am really happy that that's the case. I'm happy that Mistweavers get their time in the sun a little bit in keys. It's a fun spec to play, it's powerful, it's excellent to see it being picked up. Holy all healing increased by 3%. This just isn't enough. My next video over the Christmas break is going to be talking exclusively about Holy Priest. I won't be playing many keys with Christmas and Boxing Day and stuff like that. So I'm going to be doing a video talking about the state of Holy Priest. Suffice it to say that Holy's problem is not its raw throughput. It isn't numerical issues that the spec has. 3% buff isn't going to change anything, unfortunately. Either is Prayer of Mending healing increased by 15%. What is going to be quite good is Torrent is being buffed from 20% to 30%. This is the initial heal of Riptide. Healing Surge is being increased by 12% and Healing Stream Totem increased by 12%. Now, from what I've seen on Twitter and Reddit, this Healing Stream Totem change has something to do with the Resto Shaman aura, which means that this buff is actually more like 20 to 30%. And these are hopefully going to make what I was complaining about with Resto Shaman feel a little bit better. A little bit more powerful single target healing, especially with Healing Surge buff by 12%, Healing Stream Totem getting a sizable buff as well. This is going to be like really quite impactful for at least the way I play. I haven't played Cloudburst since Battle for Azeroth, basically. So these are both big buffs for at least the way I play Resto Shaman. So I'm going to jump into keys again this week, week 6, and see how that feels. If it does alleviate the issues I was having, Resto Shaman is going to feel like a pretty good healer in keys. It is a little disappointing to see no Holy Paladin changes in these notes. I feel like it's fairly obvious that Blizzard have gone through and looked at the raid logs or raid passes and kind of tapped down the overperformers a little bit and brought up the underperformers. But what is missing from that list is Holy Paladin. I think most other things have basically been covered, but Holy Paladin ominously left out. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching algorithm stuff, and I'll see you next week with a Holy Priest video.